everyone. Today we are going to be talking all about our projects and GitHub in terms of version control. So our projects are this kind of self-contained repository for files related to a single project on your computer, and it's done through RStudio. GitHub is where we can remotely store a version of our project using Git. So that's the underlying kind of infrastructure of GitHub. We can actually connect the two so we can work on our project locally and save all of our changes to that remote repository for version control and collaboration. So let's get started. So here's an example of a public repository on my GitHub profile. I have various R code documents here performing an analysis on a malaria data set. And below, I have a README containing some information telling me what the files do. So this file is the corresponding analysis to the supplementary material C1 in this published paper, etc., and where to find the data as I pulled it from an existing database. So let's start by building our first R project. An R project is really just a self-contained directory that allows for more reproducible workflows within your local machine. It allows users to resume exactly where you left off. So say you ran a bunch of code, you created a bunch of variables, you can close that project and come back and those variables will still be there. It also allows us to integrate version control with Git. So to create an RStudio project, we're going to go to File and New Project. Let's start one in a new directory and we're going to create a project. I'm going to call this stat545 underscore example underscore project. And you can choose where to save this. So it's going to create a folder wherever you choose. I'm going to leave mine on the desktop for now. That's fine. And I'm going to select creating a Git repository because I know that maybe not right now, but I might eventually want to sync this with GitHub. So I click Create Project. And this is going to refresh, and then I can see that I'm in this new project. Up here, I have the title of my project. A git ignore file was created. You can just ignore that for now, and then I have my R project file here. What we want to do is start adding R code to this. So we need to make a new script, file, new file, R script, and we will save this. It's going to, by default, save within that folder of the project that was just created. And this is on my desktop as I indicated in the installation. And let's just call this analysis.r. We're going to add some very simple code similar to what we did in the last lecture using that mtcars data set. So we're going to look at the first few rows of that data set, calculate the mean, and then print the mean. So it's going to send that value mean underscore miles per gallon in the environment. I should always save my work. And the nice thing is, if I exit out of this project and come back to it, I don't need to rerun this code. Mean miles per gallon is going to stay in my environment. We can also add other files. You can add multiple R scripts. You can create plots, save them as PDFs. You could add a file for, say, a README, which gives that information at the beginning of your GitHub repository, which I will show in a little bit. Really anything that you can put in a folder on your computer will be saved in this R project. So let's say for now we're happy with our R project, and now we want to sync this with GitHub. So what we're going to do is go to the R console, and we're going to call the library use this package. If you don't have this installed, make sure that you install it using install.packages use this in quotation marks. So I've called in this library, and now I can use the use underscore git function. And this is going to say, okay, R, I want you to create a Git repository for this project, which will eventually be synced to GitHub. So your options will probably change when it asks if it's okay to commit them, but you should choose whichever one means yes. In my case, it's number 2, and I click enter, and it's going to add those files to Git. If RStudio restarts or it prompts you to restart, you should do so. Just make sure that before the next step, you recall in library use this. Mine didn't restart, so I can actually just go to the next step, and that's to call use_GitHub, and a bunch of stuff is going to happen, and it's going to create that GitHub repository for my username /stat545_example_project. Now, if you get an error saying, oh, you haven't set up your GitHub credentials, I want you to go back to that installation lecture on our course website and make sure that you have the steps, follow the steps for setting up Git in RStudio. So after I've called use_GitHub, this window will pop up and I can see that in my GitHub personal account, stat545_example_project has been created. So everything that was in my R project, those 3 files, are now stored on GitHub, which is really nice. So that is our initial commit. So we are initializing that GitHub repository. What I want to do now is to be able to make some local changes and again, sync them with GitHub. So let's make some changes locally. I think it'd be a great idea to add a README that's going to appear at the bottom of our kind of launch page of our GitHub repository. We can do this by either creating a text file or a markdown file, not our markdown. We're going to go to markdown and we're going to just name this readme.md. So I'm going to save this, readme all in caps .md, save that, and it will show up here in our project. You might have to refresh it. There we go. And all I'm going to do is add a little header and some text. So I'm going to say this is my first R project, sync to GitHub, it follows the lecture at, and then I have added a link to the GitHub, the Stat545 webpage and that version control lecture. You can add whatever you want. You could add more headings, you could add photos, links, whatever, but we're just going to keep it simple. Let's also edit our analysis document. So let's say we also want to plot that miles per gallon versus the weight of the cars. And we'll save those changes as well. So I have made changes locally on our project, but I haven't synced them with the GitHub repository yet. So it's not automatic. I have to tell Git what changes I want to send to GitHub. And to do this, we should understand that there are a couple of states that Git has for files. The first is modified. So if you've changed something in the files, but Git hasn't accounted for them yet, your files are considered modified. Staged is when Git has tracked your changes, but they haven't been accounted for in that latest snapshot of your work. And then finally, we have committed. So the changes you've made have been stored and updated as the latest snapshot of your project. If we go to the Git pane here, we can see 2 files that have changed. We have an M for analysis.r, and we have some question marks for readme.md. So we've made changes in RStudio, in our R project, but Git doesn't quite know what's going on. So what we should do is stage them so Git can track those changes. And when I select that I want to stage these, we can see that this symbol appears, that A. So it means that this file, readme.md, was added and analysis.r was modified. So we want to stage those for GitHub, for Git to commit. So you modify your files, stage them, and then commit them. To commit them and say, okay, I'd like these to be included, these changes to be included in the latest snapshot of my work, we click the commit button. And here you can actually scroll through and see the changes. So in green, these are things that were added. So this was an empty file, and now it is these lines were added. And before, only these first 8 lines were included, and now we have lines 9 through 11. And we want to commit them to Git. And we do that by adding a little message. So I might say added readme, and then plot it weight versus miles per gallon. So just a kind of high-level message saying what changes were done. Then you just have to click commit. This will pop up, it says 2 files were changed, and that's perfect. Now you'll see a little info icon that says your branch is ahead of origin/main by 1 commit. So these changes are Git has accounted for, but we haven't actually pushed them to GitHub yet. Lots of lingo, you will get used to it. So what we can do is click this push button, and that's going to say, okay, Git, all of those changes that I've committed, let's send those to our main branch. So on GitHub, that main repository, let's make those changes. So that was successful. I can close all of this out. So now when I go to GitHub and I go to my repository, I can see that these changes were made. I have a README file and it actually shows up in this README section. And if I were to click analysis.r, I'd see my new code appear. So that's one way to send your changes to GitHub. There are also ways that we can do this without kind of using that user interface. We can actually use commands in the terminal. These are git add dot. This will stage all of the files that have changed in Git. Then we can commit them, git commit -m. This is a commit message. It'll probably come back and say, well, there's nothing to commit. Yeah, there's nothing to commit because I haven't made any changes. So let's just make a quick change here. I'll just add a comment. So I'm going to add those changes, commit them with this message, and it says one file was changed. And then I'm going to push those changes to the main branch of my repository. It's usually called main, sometimes it's called master. It could also be called something else if you called it, but for this example, it's main. Git push origin main. That is going to send all those changes to GitHub. And that's done. So now when I go back to GitHub and I refresh it, I can see that there was a change just made right now with this is a commit message, that message that I made. And when I click on this document, I have my new comment appear. Let's say we have a repository on GitHub that we want to have on our local machine. So what I've done is just deleted this file locally on my computer. So right now I don't have an R project or anything. This project only exists on GitHub. What I can do is go to this green code button and copy this HTTPS link. Then I can go to RStudio and I can clone this whole repository from there. I can go File, New Project, and I'm not creating a new directory. I'm actually looking at a project from a version control repository. So I'm cloning a project from a Git repository because it already exists. I can enter that URL here. I'm going to call it stat545 example project again. And I'd like to save that on my desktop. And when I create this project, everything from GitHub is going to copy over to my local computer. So the exact same. I have that analysis.r, I have that README, and I have that Git Pane. So if I wanted to add something or make changes and sync them with GitHub, I do it the exact same way. I can add my name is Grace. Save that. I can see that this was modified. I can stage it, commit it, and then I can push those changes to GitHub. And now when I look at that, I can see that the change was made right here. We can also pull in changes. So say that I am working on one computer and then my computer breaks, but I've synced my project to GitHub. Let's say that I had another new line. So there are some changes that have happened on my GitHub repository here, but I don't have them in my own version. What I can do is pull the changes. I click that pull button and it's going to pull in those changes from GitHub. One file was changed, and I even saw that line appear here. So what you can do is work on one computer, push all the changes, go to another computer, pull those changes to that computer, push them back, and you can really just make sure that your GitHub repository is up to date, and then you don't have to worry about emailing yourself files and things like that. Just one quick thing to note, I was able to push changes to a repository that I had cloned because I owned it. You can't just clone any repository on GitHub and make the changes. That would be a massive privacy issue. So make sure that if you're working collaboratively with someone, that they are a contributor on your project, which you can do on GitHub. In the GitHub settings of this repository, I can add people as collaborators. I can add people by email, username, however you'd like. So that's why I'm able to make changes to a repository. One more feature that I'd like to talk about on Git are branches. So branches allow for parallel development within a single repository. Branches are also a safe way to test out new features, fix bugs, or experiment with new ideas. So when you're creating a repository, a default branch is created. This is typically called main or master in older repositories. So the default branch is the branch that GitHub displays when anyone visits your repository, and it's also the one that's typically copied if someone tries to clone it. To create a new branch, it's actually quite easy in RStudio. We can click this this button with these purple rectangles attached to a white, I think that's a diamond, and this pane pops up. You can make a new branch. I'm going to call it Grace's branch. And it's synced with the remote origin. You can just leave all of those defaults and you can look into those further if you'd like. We click create, we'll close that. And now when I look at the Git pane, I can see which branch I'm on. Here I'm on Grace's branch and I can easily switch to main. So let's stay on this new branch and add some new code. So I'm going to say this code only exists on Grace's branch at the moment. Let's just summarize all of the variables or the columns in empty cars. So now we've made these changes, let's push them to my branch. So I'm still on Grace's branch. I'm going to stage them, commit, add a message. I'm going to say added summary stats of empty cars. And this is just on my own branch. Click the commit button, close that, and then we're going to push the changes to the new branch that we created. Okay, so here's the main GitHub page for this example project. Sometimes when you are on the main branch here and a push has been sent to another branch, a message will appear that that branch had a recent push, however many minutes ago. I don't see that here, but if I switch to Grace's branch, I'll see this branch is one commit ahead of main. So I can just hit this link, or when the other message shows up, I can just hit, there's a green button that will appear that says compare and pull request. So it's showing what has changed in my branch. So I have added these 4 lines and that summary function in my analysis.r document. So I can review the changes and say, okay, I do want these on the main branch. So I'm going to create a pull request. I can add a description of what was changed, if a lot was happening, but for me, this title, I did so little, it's sufficient. So I am comparing my branch with the main, it was showing the changes, and here I am taking those changes that were in my branch and sending them to main. So I click create pull request. Now it's going to check that it's able to merge automatically. If there's no conflicts, then I can just click merge pull request. It's going to just kind of take whatever I did on my branch and send it to the main one. Click confirm merge. And now when I go back to my example project repo and I go to main, I can see in analysis.r that that new code was added, even though I only did it on my main branch. So this is a useful way to safely test out new features or to collaborate. Each group member in your project could have a different branch that you're working on, and then you can eventually merge them together. So that's the gist of GitHub and our projects. I hope that you found this helpful. There is a full tutorial written on the course notes, which I've linked below. And as always, please ask any questions if you have any. Take care.